Welcome to episode 17 of Cove Street Boatworks. It is coming to winter here in the Northeast. It is cold in the shop today. I'm bundled up. So let's get at this. This is a 1940s-ish 22-foot Shepherd Utility Runabout. It's been here at the shop for a while. We just finally got it in. It came up from a customer down in the Philadelphia area. I've never done a bottom replacement on a Shepherd, so I was interested to see how these things were built and how they were a little bit different. And there's a couple key areas that we'll talk about that are different than typical Chris-Craft bottoms. But when this boat came in, it looked like it was in relatively good shape. It looked intact. We removed what was not removed of the interior and looked in the inside, and the interior planks were all in relatively decent shape. There were no obvious areas of rot or damage or deformity or anything like that. But there were quite a few sister frames, which was sort of puzzling because it didn't look from the interior like there was the need to add those sister frames. When we got the boat inverted and brought it into the shop and stripped off the fiberglass, we began to see evidence of probably some of the causes that drove them to do the sister frames. One of which was most of the plank to sawn frame fasteners were busted up. They were broken. A great majority of them were just either missing or they were just broken in half at that intersection between the frame and the planking. They're brass, they're number 10 Robertson square drive screws. They're decent quality, but they must have been really torqued down or this boat took quite a pounding. What we'll see on the other side when we take a look at it, because I have the bottom off on the other side, is the framing on the Shepherds. They alternate between fairly substantial sawn floor timber kinds of frames that are much deeper and broader, and those are all mahogany. And then they have frames in between those that look more classical, in terms of a Chris-Craft or a Hackercraft. They're oak, they're small, and they're set in there. And usually where the frames were, or where the fasteners were broken, was into those mahogany frames and not the oak frames. So we'll take a look at that. The planking on these things is a little bit different again than Chris-Crafts. Chris-Crafts usually have an inner planking that is diagonal 45 degrees to the keel and swept back. And it's usually thinner than the outside planking that runs fore and aft. There's varying degrees of dimensions for these things, but a lot of the boats will do the inner plywood replacement of those inner planks. And we'll use 6mm, which is about 1/4 of an inch. And then the outside planking is classically, for the smaller boats like this, 22 and less, it's usually about, 1/2 inch, 3/8. That's what you'll have for the fore and aft planking going out. Chris-Craft uses a method where they fasten from the inside out in between the frames to draw the planks together. They use these fancy little, they look like a screw with a built-in washer on them. They're very short. They're probably, I'm guessing, 5/8 of an inch, but it's plenty of there's plenty of purchase on the outside planks because the outside planks are slightly thicker and the inside planks a fairly thin skin. So it works well to draw those two together, and there's a lot of screws on the inside of some of these Chris-Crafts. This is fastened in completely different fashion. This has 2 layers of 3/8 inch material. Again, the inner one, solid material, it's not plywood, swept 45 degrees aft, just like a Chris-Craft would be. And then the outer layer is fore and aft, of course, and it's also 3/8 of an inch. Where they change things up here is on the screws here, they used Robertson screws into the frames, but where there's a fastener in between the frames, they used copper clench nails. And they use copper clench nails all along the seams of the planks, and they use copper clench nails at the butt and anywhere else where they needed to pull the 2 planks together. In the keel rabbet, in the chines, around the stem, those are all Robertson screws, as you would expect, as well as into the sawn frames. So it became an interesting question as far as how are these things built? Because the copper clench nails, there's no rose marks or anything from hammers. They're all set just below the surface, and they're pretty consistent with the way they're set. So you're thinking to yourself, how did they do this? You know, I can't imagine they used two people, one person inside the boat with a bucking iron, you know, the outside person setting the copper nail and clenching in against that bucking iron. It would take forever, right? So the forms must have been somewhat self-clenching. I've looked around to marquee groups to see if there was any photographs of any of the manufacturing processes or forms, and I haven't found any yet. But it's really interesting to note, you know, how they made this a manufacturing process flow. It would have been super labor intensive to use two people all the time because there are a lot of copper clench nails in here. So I'm assuming that whatever they built on, whatever held the frames in place and the keel in place, must have had some self-clenching aspect to it. So that's interesting, and it's going to be an interesting question as far as how we're going to deal with that with the new bottom. With two heavier planks, you need a fair amount of force to pull these things together and shape them, and especially since Shepherd boats, the frames are a little bit more broadly spaced than on a Chris Craft or on a Hacker Craft, for example. So there's a lot more force in getting these planks to bend. We'll probably use plywood for the inner and, you know, 5200 on a more traditional, a more modern bottom on this, but clench nails are still going to be something we're going to have to figure out how we're going to work around. The second thing that was interesting, and I didn't really expect, and we can see it here, we'll take a camera closer to this, is that when you look at the bottom here, none of the fasteners had any kind of bungs or putty or anything. They're all set flush, and the fiberglass was laid over it up to the water line. So it looks to me like the fiberglass was put on at the factory, something I didn't expect. It was a really good job. The fiberglassing they did, very clean. As you can see here, there's a lot of strength still to the bonding of the polyester to the wood. Some of it came off in big sheets, but a lot of it, you know, we're going to have to take the heat gun and a scrape or two and clean it all up. But it looks to me like this bottom was put on, the fiberglass was put on at the factory. So those are two things we're looking at. Probably the only other thing that was sort of puzzling on the bottom, as I already indicated, most of the fasteners here that are screw fasteners are square drive Robertsons, as you would expect with a Canadian boat, and they're brass. However, in between there, you'll see there's a whole lot of small, again, 5/8 or even smaller than that, 1/2-inch screws. They look like they're number 6s, Robertsons, but they're steel. And they sprinkled them everywhere where they probably couldn't get the planks to pull down and take the proper shape that they wanted, especially in between the sawn frames. They put these steel screws, and they were miserable to get out. As you can well imagine, they were corroded, the heads would strip out on them. They were small enough that you could use a pry bar and just rip the two planks apart. But we're going to see they were used extensively all over the place. So obviously they had some problem with their methods, their practices here, trying to get that bottom to conform and pull down. All right, so we're on the other side of the boat now that I've removed the bottom planking from, and you can begin to see some of the structure and what sort of makes it different from other boats. You can see here right up next to the stem where the stem knee is and the lower part of the stem. The stem's a 2-piece stem, or 3-piece if you want to call the gripe or the knee that's in there. There's a sawn piece that goes up against the gripe in the lower part of the stem, and then another sawn floor that extends that captures that lower part of the stem. These are all mahogany. The frame itself and this sawn floor timber that goes across are all mahogany. And then we have a white oak frame that catches the end of the stringer, the longitudinal stringer. And notice that the longitudinal stringer here, it's flat. On most American built boats, they're vertical, which gives them a lot of longitudinal stiffness. This is a little bit different, and it's not even a single piece. It's dug fir. It looks like about 2x4. It looks pretty dimensional. It's joined in the middle with a lap joint, and it's bolted through, but it is flat, and it becomes the level that the floor is set on. So we go from a sort of a traditional kind of sawn oak frame into a doubled up one. Again, mahogany on the outside for this, and then that soft sawn floor timber, which is bolted through the longitudinal stringer. And then another oak floor frame that you can see is pulled down. And then we go to just a solid piece of mahogany that is very large, very high, you know, like a sawn floor timber. This attaches with a gusset to the side frames, but that's it. There's no other additional frame here. And then we go back to oak, and then you can see the sistering starts here. And we'll take a closer look at this as we move down. But here they've sistered a piece of sort of trashy oak on the outside of that sawn floor timber, and they've replaced the gusset. So we'll move the camera down, we'll take a look at that. This lower part of the stem is looking pretty punky. I think we're gonna have to replace that. That's where the lifting ring is. It's just weathered, you know, I mean, there's no real other way to look at it. The chine itself it's got quite a big bevel cut on it. It's a large chine, pretty heavy, but you can see that it's cracked and split here. This kind of thing, I'm always questioning whether I want to repair it, because oak just doesn't glue that well, even with modern epoxy formulations. Sometimes it's just easier just to replace it. I don't know, we'll deal with that when we come to it. You can see probably why these sistered frames were added, because at some point these mahogany sawn floor timbers got just so weak. I mean, they're not terribly strong to begin with, and there were some pretty big screws in these, so I don't know, they even fall apart more as we go back. I mean, these are actually split and broken up. Now we're moving aft in the boat. Hopefully the heater is not blasting my audio here, but let me tell you, it's cold today. It is really windy, and it drops below 50 in here quickly if I don't have the heater going. My hands get numb. So we're aft now in the boat. We're back where the engine is. This has a big straight six Chrysler in it with a V-drive. So it's reverse mounted. There's engine logs, as you can see, that are bolted into the flat laid longitudinal, but there's not much framing back here. This framing is pretty light. You know, you have the sawn floors that we've been seeing. This one gets even lighter. You can see it's been reinforced, and there's an aluminum plate in there even. There's really not much here to take up the torque of that engine. It is you know, it's not a race engine by any means. It's fairly slow turning, but nevertheless, pretty lightly built. You know, you would expect a little more stiffness back here. And as we get into the transom, you can see the lower transom bow is actually two sawn pieces that are bolted together. One, the bottom one or the inner one, looks like it's about 3/4, and then the outer one's about maybe 5/8. But they're bolted together and fastened into the transom. The transom itself has had quite a bit of work done to it. There's battens that are laminated on the top side of it. It's all got to come off, and it's all got to be redone. This whole end of the boat is sort of messed up from the spray rails all the way through. So that concludes our 22-foot Shepherd initial survey. We'll be tearing this other side off and taking a look at the frames and structures a little more closely as we progress. I'll be doing a series of videos on this as we continue forward with the restoration and try to assess, you know, what the strategy is going to be, how we're going to approach this repair, and how we're going to try to keep it within the confines of the agreed upon budget. It's always a challenge when you're doing wooden boat restoration. So we'll be taking a look at that and documenting how we make these decisions. We have a lot of other work in here for the winter, so I hope to be doing a lot more consistent videos. We have a couple of EM Whites and a White Canoe Company canoe in here. We have a Rickards canoe, which is an awesome, very underrated Maine guide canoe with some modern methods approach to it. And we have, of course, our 24-foot Fay and Bowen Jr. that we need to finish up. So we have a lot of work to do this winter, and like I said, I hope to be generating a lot more videos. Please like and subscribe. Please let me know if there's aspects to the work that I'm doing in here or some kind of restorations that you would like to see in more detail. Approaches, strategies, you know, those kinds of conversations. If there's a particular boat you're interested in seeing restored, if we're not doing it here, I might know other restoration shops that are doing it, and we can go video them. So let me know what you're interested in seeing, and thank you very much. Until the next episode.